The Vampyre of Croglin Grange. Greetings, dear listeners. I'm really excited tonight, since this is going to be my first attempt at making a YouTube video at home. Hopefully the college kids, the students, the party animals next door, won't provide any unnecessary background noise. I've got my new laptop, Premiere Pro is installed. Premiere Pro. I got a new mic, and I'm ready to go for another ghost story of a librarian. Another ghost stories of a librarian. This one is a true story. I know it's true, as Granny told me. And anything your granny tells you has got to be true, right? And I have other, more concrete, or perhaps I should say, I also have some physical proof. And I wanted to tell it to honor her memory. You see, Granny passed away last week and was buried 3 days ago. I hope somehow that Granny is aware of me sharing her story, and that she would approve of me doing so. But I'm sure she is aware, and that she would approve. When Granny was 20 years old, she went to live on an isolated farm near a small town in North Wales, where her brothers, Lawrence and Stuart, were doing graduate work at the university. The brothers had rented the farm for the year, and Granny came to keep house for them, regarding the whole adventure as a year-long holiday before she would have to return to Canada and face real adult life. The brothers were able to rent the farm, known as Croglin Grange, or simply the Grange, for very reasonable terms. Almost a little too reasonable. But when they asked the local people, the locals assured them that there was nothing wrong with the place, nothing at all. Assured them a little too much, a little too quickly. Do you think it's because we're next to that old graveyard? Stuart said at dinner, shortly after they moved in. It is rather creepy. Oh, I don't know. Granny, whose first name was Emily, had said. I find it atmospheric, rather picturesque. Sometimes I stand at my bedroom windows at night and gaze out at it. It's hauntingly beautiful in the moonlight. Indeed, Granny loved to gaze at the churchyard when the silvery light of the moon illuminated the crumbling gray and green mausolea and the tombstones, creating an image as stark and as haunting as a spectral engraving. It was a sultry night in August when Granny stood at the French doors of her ground floor room and stared out at the phantasmagoria of the graveyard in the witchlight. A ripe, full moon cast a satiny glare over the crumbling stonework. It was so beautiful, an involuntary sigh escaped Granny's lips. It was then she noticed the 2 pinpricks of red light in the graveyard. What is that? She thought. It looks like cigarettes, like the ends of 2 lit cigarettes in the dark. But who would be smoking in the cemetery at night? Some young men from the village? I hope they're not drinking and planning to howl at the moon. Yeah, I know all about kids drinking and howling at the moon, but oh well. But as she watched, Granny realized the 2 red lights stayed an equal distance apart. like eyes. Were they eyes? And animals? What animals had eyes that glowed in the dark? What the hell? Sorry. And then she noticed the vague outline of a dark body, which appeared connected to the eyes, and she murmured aloud, "It's just a cat. A black cat." Granny was turning away from the French doors when the cat jumped over the low stone wall of the churchyard, landed on 2 feet, and began scuttling forward. And in horror, she realized the approaching figure was that of a man. If it was human. She shut the French doors and backed away as the figure drew near. It was a small, thin man in black, incredibly dirty clothes, with claw-like hands, and a face. A pallid face, seamed and wrinkled like a walnut, topped by a few strands of dank, scraggly hair. But the eyes were the worst. Red, glowing, piercing, and hypnotizing. Granny couldn't stop gazing into those red orbs. They seemed to sap her will. She had backed away from the doors and was now seated on the edge of her bed, unable to look away, but also unable to move, unable to scream. Thank God the doors were locked. Were they locked? Were they? And as Granny asked herself that question, the creature, for whatever it wasn't a man, it wasn't human, pushed the doors open. Granny had shut them, but had failed to lock them, and now it was too late. As the thing stepped into the room, Granny was assailed by a terrible musty stench, the odor of the grave, and she realized to her disgust that the creature was covered in mold and dirt, the dirt of the grave. Now, when Emily, my grandmother, was a young woman, she had had long blonde hair which hung to her waist. As the creature, the thing, drew up to her, almost choking her with its charnel smell, it reached out its filthy, talon-like hands, seized her by the hair, pulled back her head to expose her throat, and bit her with its greenish fanged teeth. Emily finally found her voice, as if the spell the creature's eyes had exerted on her was finally broken, and she began to scream and scream again. Within moments, her brother Larry was pounding on the door. "Emmy, what's wrong? What's wrong? Open the door, eh?" Granny had locked the door before undressing for bed, and had forgotten to unlock it. Now both brothers were battering at the door, while scream after scream burst from the frantic and struggling girl. And then both Larry and Stuart were in the room, and the thing released her, and leapt through the doors. Stuart ran after it, while Larry went to attend to Emily's wounds. But the younger brother was back in a moment, panting. I chased him across the lawn, but he jumped the low wall and got into the graveyard over there. "Run and fetch the doctor quickly," Larry ordered. Stuart went. Granny's wounds looked worse than they were. The teeth had missed the jugular vein, but the Welsh doctor was shocked, and also suspicious as to the source of the wounds. "You say these wounds were caused by a man who attacked your sister? They look more like they were caused by the teeth of an animal. You Canadians aren't keeping any of your native animals, wolves or mountain lions, here, are you?" Sorry, I thought I heard something. Granny told her brothers she had been attacked by a cadaverous man with glowing red eyes, and that she wasn't sure he had really been alive. But Larry and Stuart assured her, or at least tried to assure her, that it must have been a tramp or an escaped lunatic, and that he was unlikely to ever come back. Still, they sent her to stay with friends in London for 6 weeks. Granny returned in late fall, and once again found herself drawn to the French doors and to the charming view of the ethereal graveyard, bathed in the rays of a full October moon. She was happy to be back and wasn't afraid. And then she saw them, the 2 pinpricks of red light, the eyes she had seen once before, the eyes she knew so well. Granny left the room, and when she returned, she wasn't alone. She then went and opened the French doors, then went and lay down on the bed, the moonlight washing over her. It sprang through the open doors and advanced towards her, and then Stuart jumped out from the shadows and struck the thing with an iron poker. With a snarl, the thing wrestled the poker from the younger man, but then Larry was there, and leveling the barrel of a handgun, and the creature dived through the open doors with the older brother in hot pursuit. Several shots rang out, and then Larry returned. It got over the wall and into the graveyard, where it went into an old crypt, even though I shot it several times. I wasn't going into the crypt after it. It would have been worth my life. But in the morning, the brothers entered the crypt, which had belonged to the family which had owned Croglin Grange, and they found the various coffins inside in a state of disorder, broken open, with their bones strewn about and gnawed, all except for one coffin. And when they removed the lid of that coffin, they found lying within a small, thin man in black, incredibly dirty clothes, with claw-like hands, and a face, a pallid face seamed and wrinkled like a walnut, topped by a few strands of dank, scraggly hair. And there were bullet holes in the black clothes. They had with them a sharpened stake, which they drove through the thing's heart. It screamed and writhed horribly, black crud vomiting from its stinking maw. And then they dragged the coffin out into the churchyard, doused it with petrol, and burned it to ashes. And Granny was troubled no more during her stay in Wales. Guys, I'm sorry for these constant interruptions, but I keep hearing noises outside. It's night here, and I can't see what's doing it. Anyhow, I'll proceed. Now, Granny told me this story when I was 18, and I didn't really believe it. But then I realized she had always worn, for as long as I had known her, my entire life, these high collars, buttoned up, which completely covered her throat, as if she was trying to hide something. Scar tissue? From a vicious wound? A bite? If the thing was a vampire, and it sure sounds like it was, and it bit Granny, wouldn't that mean that she, too, would become a vampire when she died? I had to know. Granny had an open coffin. I know it was wrong, but when I was alone with her for a few minutes at the funeral parlor, I unbuttoned her collar, opened it. On her throat were the scars of 2 terrible bite marks. The mark of the vampire. So she really had been attacked by the undead. I loved you, Granny. Very much. But if you're out there as a vampire, let's not meet. Guys, there's something in the other room. Something moving around. Granny? Granny!